A cloud of dust and a hearty hi-yo Silver, the Lone Ranger.
The Jack Benny Program, presented by Lucky Strike.
Duke is on the air.
When I was in junior high, I was at my grandmother's house listening to her old wooden Radiola radio, RCA radio. And I was doing something they called DXing, which is trying to hear stations from a long way away, which you do at night. And I came across these two people talking, and I didn't know what it was.
Abner, what in the name of common sense are you up to now?
Well, I'm getting things all ready to go on that line hunt tonight,
And what it was an old-time radio show called Lum and Abner about two old men in Pine Ridge, Arkansas that owned a general store, and it was the goings-on of that community. I went and got my grandmother, and I said, "What is this?" And she said, "Oh, that's Lum and Abner. They were on the radio in the 40s. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I started listening. They said, "Tune in again tomorrow at 6:15 for another edition of Lum and Abner." So all right, I did. And I got a book called The Big Broadcast, and I learned all the different shows and who started them. And eventually I just started saving money from my paper route and buying LPs. At the time, there were two companies that were selling old-time radio shows on records. And I would ride my bike down to the record store, buy 3 or 4 albums, take them home and listen to them. And that's what started me collecting old-time radio shows.
Thanks, Mr. Benny. And by the way, you'll be happy to know that we're almost sold out of the popcorn you made.
Good. Now push the lemonade.
In 1982, they were doing some programming changes, and a guy named Jim Back came up to me and said, "We've got 4 hours open on Sunday afternoon. Would you like to play some of your old-time radio shows?" And I said, "Sure." And from that moment on, my goal was always, I want to pass this art form down to future generations. I don't care if I make any money doing it or anything like that. I just want my hobby to keep going. AM 970, KCFO, Joe Riddle, another Sunday night. And you know what that means? The Penny's Fine Foods Radio Theater. 3 hours of the best in old-time radio as we tune back the radio dial back to when radio was young. I seem to have a small listenership. It's a niche type program, but they're very passionate and very, very loyal. I get a great response, especially around Christmas, because I always do a special Christmas Eve and Christmas Day broadcast that for some reason that really resonates with a lot of people. A lot of people enjoy that. I did have one lady call me one time. I was at KRMG, and she said, "I'm going to call the FCC tomorrow." I was like, "Why?" "Well, you just played a Lucky Strike commercial on the Jack Benny show, and you can't do that. That's against FCC rules and regulations, and you can't play a Lucky Strike commercial on the radio. It's against the law," and blah, blah. I said, "I didn't play a Lucky Strike commercial. A commercial is when someone pays the radio station to promote their product. Lucky Strike didn't pay KRMG. As a matter of fact, Lucky Strike isn't even around anymore." When they took me off the air in '85, the consultants said, "Well, it makes us sound like an old person's radio station." And I said, "No." I said, "Old people don't listen to it. Old people heard it the first time. They've already heard it. They're not the ones that's listening to it." I think of the theater of the mind, but it's really personal. It's really unique to you. If I'm listening to a scary show, my boogeyman is the worst boogeyman I've ever seen. It may not look anything like what you see in your mind's eye, but we both get out of it what we need. But you can't do that with TV, and you can't do that with, film. It can only happen auditorily. Radio shows were a way, for me, it was like reading a book for most people. I was getting stories and learning history.
The Skelly Oil Company presents Captain Midnight.
And the neat thing is that I have people who listened to my show back in the 80s. They would listen to Jack Armstrong, and they were kids listening with their parents. Now they are parents, and they're listening to it with their kids. And so I was able to succeed in doing something I wanted to do, which pass the art form down to another generation. And I was able to do that. I'm glad you decided to spend your Sunday evening here with us on AM 970 KCFO.